Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Florida got an exemption from offshore drilling, so why not Maryland? Well, welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Opposition to decision by the Trump administration to open up the coastal waters of the United States has gotten some bipartisan pushback. And in Maryland, it has extended from Republican Governor Larry Hogan and Democratic Attorney General Brian Frosh to local leaders such as Rick Meehan, the mayor of Ocean City. But it's not clear if the Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke, will grant the blue state such an exemption as it did for the Florida Governor, Rick Scott. In our studio this morning is Matt Heim. He's with the Assateague Coastal Trust, which has been fighting efforts to open up the coastline for offshore drilling. And welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Don.
So, well, let me get a sense about what was your reaction when Florida got this exemption? We should, by the way, note that Mar-a-Lago, what seems to be the southern White House here, vacation spot for President Trump, got this exemption, citing tourism and the environment and so on, as opposed to any other state. Well, the first state that right out the box.
Dumbfounded would probably be the best word to describe it. And, for the listeners' benefit, I think it would be worthwhile to sort of talk about how we got to this point.
Sure, go ahead.
Right. So back in January of 2017, before the Trump administration came in, the Obama administration signed off on a 5-year offshore leasing program that covered the years 2017 through 2022. The development of that plan, that signing of that plan, was the culmination of 3 years of public comment process, deliberations, study, and in the early phases of the development of that plan, the Obama administration proposed opening areas of the Atlantic. So as you were aware, Assateague Coastal Trust and organizations up and down the East Coast worked really hard to let people be aware of what was being proposed, and close to 150 towns up and down the East Coast passed resolutions saying they didn't want offshore drilling in the Atlantic. Moreover, business communities spoke up. Leaders at both the federal and state level spoke up and said they didn't want drilling. So that law was signed, that plan was signed into law in January of 2017. If we fast forward just 3 months to April, President Trump signs an executive order basically ordering the Department of Interior to redraft that plan. And the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the agency that's been overseeing this whole process, they've been holding some public meetings here locally. And I had the chance to ask them, what changed in 3 months between that 3-year well-thought-out plan that removed the Atlantic and this new plan, which is just unprecedented in the sheer scope of the areas that are being considered. And the only thing that's changed is the administration. So when I hear this about Florida being exempted, besides the sheer scope of the plan and what we're looking at, it's astounding.
Now, of course, the president, when he campaigned, he said he was going to open this stuff up, that's what he's going to do. Sounds to me like that basically his administration has done exactly what he told the American people they were going to do.
That's true. He did campaign on opening American resources. But it's also worth noting that there are laws that dictate how our offshore resources are managed. It's not President Trump's playground out there. He can't just sign an executive order and oil rigs are going to show up. The Outer Continental Shelf, the law that manages how these procedures are made, clearly dictate how resources should be open and what should be evaluated when those resources should be open. It should be based on the energy needs of the country, the potential environmental impact, and the potential impact to coastal zones. And if you take a look at the amount of oil that's out in the Atlantic, it just doesn't make sense to open up the Atlantic to drilling when you look at the economic figures as far as tourism and commercial fishing that would be put at stake.
So how easy is it just to simply flip the switch? I know that, for instance, there's some discussion about even if you have particularly an existing executive order, if a new administration comes in, it's not necessarily that you can just simply overturn it, that you have to have certain rationales if you go to court. Does this fall under the same kind of rubric?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a long, drawn-out process. Where we are right now is the opening stages of developing a new plan. The plan that the Trump administration is trying to put forth would cover the years 2019 through 2024. So it would be a new 5-year leasing program. Where we are right now is we're in a public comment period on the draft proposed program, which was released a little bit earlier this year. Once that comment period closes, then those comments will be evaluated, and a proposed program will be put forth. Another public comment period will come out. I would anticipate that that would happen towards the end of this year or early in 2019. And once that public comment period closes, then a final program will be put forth and reviewed before Congress before signing into law. So this whole process to develop the plan will take somewhere between 2.5 to 3 years. Once the plan is put into place, there's some other processes that would take place, lease sales, things of that nature. If the plan moved forward in the direction that it's headed, drilling wouldn't take place for a couple years down the road, or probably close to a decade.
I mean, because matter of fact, I was going to say, so if the administration were to say move forward with this, assume that there's a second Trump administration, which means that or whatever administration continues on this path. When is the likelihood you might see any kind of offshore drilling then?
You'd probably be looking about 10 to 15 years down the road before you see rigs. So there would be some time before that happens, which is a good thing because there's plenty of opportunity for us to challenge this both in the public comment period right now, and there's also some legal challenges that will probably be coming up as well with this plan.
So if we're talking about the public comment, and I know there was a meeting, I guess it was supposed to be a series of something like 20 meetings. What do you make of those meetings? Is the administration meeting kind of receptive at all? I know the Maryland Attorney General basically said, if he doesn't want, if he wants to get to input, he can just, all he has to do is sign it and send it back in terms of what he thinks needs to be done. And obviously, Frosch opposes this. How receptive, and what do you make of these public hearings?
I have a lot of respect for BOEM, the people that work at BOEM. The reports that they put out are really well-founded in science. My problem with these open hearings is that they're not really hearings. It's kind of set up like a science fair type atmosphere where there's a lot of informational booths that you can walk around. So it doesn't foster dialogue per se. We don't get a chance to have a conversation as a community about what would be the impact to our coast from a proposal like this. The other issue is that these meetings are being held pretty far from the coast. So in Maryland, the meeting's held in Annapolis. Down in North Carolina, it's going to be held in Raleigh. So it's hard for the people who are going to be most impacted by this proposal to get to those meetings, and that's a serious flaw in the way this is being held.
So this is not a situation where the administration or administration officials are sitting up on a dais or something, and people like input. I mean, how do they get input if it isn't like a forum like that? I mean,
right. So this is designed to give the public information about the proposal. So
So how? Okay, so they give the information, but then how does the public then get to comment? I mean, how?
At the meeting, there are computer stations set up. So if somebody would like to submit a comment, all of the comment process for this is online. Regulations.gov is where people can go to submit comments. I would encourage folks that want to submit comments to go and visit Assateague Coastal Trust's website, which is www.act4bays.org. And the reason being is that what the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is looking for in these comments isn't, I don't want drilling off my coast, this is a bad idea. They're looking for well thought out, cited comments, which is a difficult thing to do. So on our website at Assateague Coastal Trust, we've put together a lot of the research and citations. So if people are concerned, we've taken some of the general things that we're concerned about, and people can take a look at that. And we've done some of the legwork for the preliminary research for them. So I definitely encourage them to visit our website and take a look at that if they're interested in learning more about the proposal and how to submit comments.
So what do you see as the harm in terms of offshore drilling when it comes to particularly the Maryland coast?
Yeah, well, we've got a tourism economy that really generates a lot of revenue for our state and the local economy. And what this plan does is, all of the revenue and the jobs that would be created aren't going to come to the Eastern Shore. At the meeting yesterday, a BOEM official was asked about what kind of jobs the Eastern Shore could expect from this, and he couldn't give an answer. His answer was, well, there might be some. So as far as the economic benefits that would come from this plan, jobs, revenue sharing, it's not included in this proposal. There would be no revenue sharing with any Atlantic states based on this proposal. There's not a whole lot of economic benefit. That said, if anything should happen, be it a spill or if during the exploratory process, if there's an impacts to fisheries, all of that burden is going to fall to our local communities. So that could have a huge impact. Beyond that, when we look at the economic and the environmental impacts to our ecosystems here, there's something that this plan kind of erodes at a societal level. So traditionally, when these plans are put forth, back in August, when the Trump administration got this process started, there's a request for information that's primarily geared towards the states, towards research institutions, towards industry, and things of that nature. Traditionally, if a governor says, we don't want drilling off of our state's coast, they're removed from the plan. They aren't included in this draft proposed program that went out. It's worth noting that almost every state along the Atlantic, their governors said, we don't want to be included in that. The Pacific said they don't want to be included in this plan, and yet the Trump administration moved forward and included them anyway, which I think seriously erodes state sovereignty, and I think it's an insult to the people who live along the coast who are going to be bearing the burden of this, who have said no. They said no during the Obama administration. Nothing has changed. So I think it's a lot of disrespect in this plan.
What do you think, by the way, would happen to, say, something like tourism?
Great. So, I mean, imagine if 4th of July weekend, we don't need a BP size, spill. Imagine a small spill washes up on Ocean City and they have to close a couple streets of beaches in Ocean City during 4th of July weekend. Or if it happens on the Thursday before 4th of July weekend and people change their vacation plans. I mean, think of the impact that in Ocean City, the businesses down there need to make all of their money in a brief 3-month window. If they lost a month due to a beach cleanup, what would that do to our local economy? What would that do to local businesses? What would that do to local jobs? And we're not going to make up for that in revenue from other areas. I've had conversations with people down in the Gulf. And what happened during the BP disaster is, the whole culture of the communities, the tourist communities down there in the Gulf changed. What happened was that the mom and pops, which was the lifeblood of the community, provided a lot of kind of the culture that was down there. They couldn't survive the cleanup, and what happened is a lot of corporate entities came in, and so you get the bigger entities that have the capital to survive that kind of impact. So it completely changed the look and feel of a lot of Gulf communities. And we don't want to see that here on our coast.
So what do you, by the way, make of the fact that this seems to be almost bipartisan? I mean, we have Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican. Obviously, he has distanced himself in many ways from the Trump administration. But, combined with Brian Frosch, a Democrat, there seems to be this bipartisan pushback to the idea of offshore drilling.
Yeah, I think.
And do you think that's going to have some impact at all? I mean, in terms of bipartisan, we obviously Rick Scott certainly got his break.
I hope so. As divided as we are as a country, it's nice to see us coming together around something, right?
Right.
And I think that given the polarization that's going on, when we have an issue that we're all coming together around, we should pay attention to that. And I think that's a real indication of just how short-sighted and just what a problem this plan is.
So, in terms of people organizing, how long have people been organizing against this concept of offshore drilling?
I think we've been organizing since offshore.
Forever?
Yeah, forever, for a long time. Here, locally, Assateague Coastal Trust has been involved in this issue since 2014, when the Obama administration first unveiled plans that would have allowed drilling in the Atlantic. And we worked really hard here on the Delmarva Peninsula with coastal communities to work to pass resolutions that we sent in response to that. Every town from Lewis to Ocean City along our coast has passed resolutions, along with both counties on the eastern shore of Virginia. So we can rightfully claim we have unanimous opposition from coastal communities here on Delmarva to this plan. The Obama administration chose to remove the Atlantic based on the concerns of coastal citizens, as well as concerns from the military and NASA, which use the Atlantic for operations, and offshore drilling could have a big impact to wallops and also to naval operations that are going on off of our coast.
So, in terms of those governmental entities, do you think that they're going to have any impact at all on
I'm pretty sure that wallops and the Navy will be submitting comments on this as well, and I would imagine those comments aren't too much different than what they submitted the last go around, and I hope that the Secretary Zinke and the Department of Interior weigh them equally well.
By the way, just to turn just briefly to another subject, which is we have discussion about offshore wind, which is another offshore development. Some pushback by the Ocean City folks saying, well, we don't want these things, that we can see them. Where does that stand at this point?
It's I think that we're at a point where hopefully we can get people around the table and come to a consensus on what's a good way to move forward. I think that the impetus to do something is we need to make a change in how we're getting our energy very soon. When you look at climate change and the impacts of sea level rise, there's an interesting study just put out about real estate value that ranked Ocean City zip code as one of the most impacted areas as far as property value that will be impacted by the rising sea level. Salisbury is ranked very high in that as well. So we need to get off of carbon, right? And wind is certainly a way that we can do that. One thing that I will note on wind is, Representative Andy Harris was somebody who put forth an amendment to push wind a little bit further off of our coast in an effort to help, make sure that it wouldn't have a big impact on tourism. Representative Harris is our only state leader at the federal level who is in favor of this offshore drilling proposal, which I think is incredibly unfortunate and disconnected from the citizens. The same people that approached him about offshore wind, Mayor Meehan, Ocean City business community, the fishing community, those are the same people that are opposed to this offshore drilling proposal as well. So I would strongly encourage Representative Harris to listen to his constituents in this area. And if you live in the 1st District of Maryland, I encourage you to contact Representative Harris and let him know how you feel about offshore drilling, because we need him to come to his senses and make sure that he's representing the interest of his district, and not trying to court favor with the Trump administration.
How serious is it that he isn't on board?
I think that it says, I think it would make a powerful statement for a Republican like Andy Harris to come out in opposition to this. And I think that sending that message to the Trump administration would hopefully turn a few heads and could play a really pivotal role in getting the Mid-Atlantic and portions of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia's coast out of consideration in this proposal.
By the way, has your organization, other organizations, contacted his office? If so, what have they basically said?
Yeah, we've reached out to him numerous times since 2014, working onto this. The communications that we've received is Representative Harris is in favor of an all of the above energy program, and that he's in favor of offshore drilling so long as it can be done in an environmentally responsible manner. I'll also note for your audience that there's been a lot of deregulation under the Trump administration when it comes to offshore drilling. Just before this proposal was put forth, the Trump administration removed regulations that were put in place after the Deepwater Horizon spill, having to do with blowout preventers and safety and things of that nature. So not only is this proposal looking to expand offshore drilling, it's also reducing regulations at the same time, which is a recipe for disaster.
So is there an environmentally way, in your view, to have offshore drilling?
I don't think it makes sense in the Atlantic whatsoever. And I think when you look at this,
why is that?
Well, where oil would be located in the Atlantic, where they most likely would drill, would be offshore in the canyon area. So we'd be looking at deep water drilling out there, which is inherently dangerous. That's what the BP disaster. One other note too on that, a lot of fishing community, I've heard rumors that they'd be in favor of offshore drilling because of structure, right? It would bring fishing structure. Where the rigs would most likely be located in the Atlantic would be in deep water, and those deep water rigs there is no structure. They're actually kept in place via an anchor lines and engines. So that's another thing to take in consideration on this. But the reason is that the Atlantic, we have nor'easters, we have hurricanes, it's a violent atmosphere out there year round. It's a small window when the ocean out there is calm, pretty much our summer months. So it's a much different environment than what you would be looking at in the Gulf of Mexico, much more violent storms. And, the coastal economy that stretches and the population there along the East Coast, it's a bigger area with a lot more at risk from a GDP, from an economic and environmental perspective as well.
So is there in terms of these rigs being out there, is it comparable to something like BP? Or you seem to indicate that it might be more volatile than, say, the Gulf.
Right. Well, weather-wise, you just look at what you're dealing with weather in the Atlantic. The Atlantic is a much angrier body of water than the Gulf of Mexico is. The Gulf of Mexico, they get their Category 4 and 5 storms here and there. They definitely have a pretty violent hurricane season. But there's a lot of storms that go into the Atlantic that don't hit the coast on a regular basis that curl right up where these rigs would be located. Beyond that, we've got nor'easters. that we deal with all winter long and into the spring. So it's a much more volatile environment that would create more inherent risk in drilling.
So I guess one of the questions becomes, if I'm an oil company, do I really want to invest into areas that have that kind of environment? Have oil companies really said, okay, we really want to explore this, or might they be hesitant?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that in the proposal there wasn't a whole lot of interest from oil companies in drilling the Atlantic. There's interest in exploring and sort of seeing what's out there, but the price of a barrel of oil, to make it equitable to drill in the Atlantic, it needs to be pretty high. We're right on the cusp of it, but the price of oil would need to go up in order for it to be economically viable to drill in the Atlantic. Moreover, there's not a lot of oil in the Atlantic. The best science available to us estimates that if the entire Atlantic were to be drilled, median estimates would be about a 6-month supply of oil. The same studies give about a 5% chance, best case scenario, there might be about an 18-month supply of oil. So median best guess are about 6 months. Beyond that, at our current consumption rate, would be a little bit longer than that. And another point that just makes this drive home, and I think this is why we have such bipartisan support, it just doesn't make sense due to that lack of oil. If you look at the figures that are put out by the American Petroleum Institute, they estimated they'd be producing about 1 million barrels of oil a day out of the Atlantic at peak production. Even in that best case scenario, the entire Atlantic would be sucked up dry of oil in less than 30 years. Right? So why should we put our entire coastal tourism, our culture, our way of life, our environment at risk for an industry that'll be here for 30 years, that we won't see jobs, that we won't see revenue sharing, and we're going to be bearing all of the risk for this? It doesn't make any sense.
I was going to say, but why wouldn't we see jobs?
Well, most of the
you
jobs
have to be guys out there on the rigs, right?
Right. So most of those jobs aren't going to come to this area. If this proposal moves forward, the jobs would primarily go to either the Philadelphia or Norfolk area. So they're not going to be coming. There's not going to be infrastructure on the Eastern Shore. If there is, it probably would be minimal. And the thing is that most of those jobs would go to folks from the Gulf of Mexico who have the expertise to know what's going on, and come in with that skill set. Moreover, as I said, and if you look at towns where there were fracking booms, out in North Dakota and areas like that, there's this big boom. You just start to rely on this segment of the economy, and then, like I said, 30 years later, it's gone. What do we do now, right? And that's where I think industries like offshore wind make a lot more sense. Wind's not going anywhere. We've already got companies in Salisbury that are starting to develop offshore wind. We've got jobs that are already starting to be created. It just makes way more sense to evolve where we're getting our energy from, and move in a direction that's more sustainable, both from an economic and ecological perspective.
So how far off do you think that wind is in terms of our area? I've heard people have been talking about for a while. There was, I think, some proposals up in Delaware which didn't come to fruition, and obviously they want to try to partner with utilities and so on.
Yeah, so it's a little bit murky on where we are in Maryland, given everything that's going on as far as where these are going to be located. But from my understanding is that if everything moved forward according to the plan that was approved by the state of Maryland, wind could be coming online as soon as in the next 7 years or so, and increasingly more in the years to follow.
So and do you have to then make deals, I guess, with the utilities? Is that how it works in terms of supply and?
I would assume so.
Just curious.
I'm not sure exactly how all of that works. I know the transmission lines would come in, and it would be a place where I think initially price for utility would probably go up, but then overall, once everything comes online, the utility price would come down.
So in terms of this moving forward, do you expect any action in Congress at all?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So the final step in this whole drawn-out process is a final plan will be put forth, and it goes to Congress for approval. To my knowledge, I don't think Congress has ever tampered with a plan at any point during the 50-year plus time period that this law has been governing how we manage our offshore resources. But according to this timeline, that would probably go to Congress after the 2018 midterm elections. So who knows? I think that there's a lot of flaws in this plan that that could hang it up. And one potential avenue where it could get hung up is in Congress. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, is there a? I'm now in terms of like other congressional folks. I mean, put Harris aside for the moment. Are there other congressional folks along the coastline, Republicans and Democrats, particularly Republicans, who say no, we don't want this?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, is that can be seen too?
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. You look down in Virginia. There's Republican congressmen in Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, who have come out in opposition to this. Governor Christie in New Jersey came out in opposition to this. So this is a bipartisan issue. Like I said, if in this climate we have a bipartisan issue, there's some serious flaws in this proposal, I think.
Are you surprised at all
about
that it's so bipartisan that it's? I mean, because I can remember decades ago where it really did divide along Republican and Democratic lines, or conservatives, both.
Right, and I think that under the Obama administration, when they put forth plans to drill in the Atlantic, the citizens really made a lot of noise, and I think that got politicians' attentions. There were a lot of politicians during that process who were initially in favor of drilling, and have since come out in opposition. Governor Hogan's a great example. Not that he was in favor of opposition, but sort of kept an arm's length distance during the Obama administration to the offshore drilling issue. But we worked with the town of Ocean City. We worked with the Chamber of Commerce in Ocean City, town of Berlin. They all passed resolutions. And with the Trump administration moving forward, I think that plays a role in how Governor Hogan has handled this as well. So I think this is a great example, this whole issue, of how the citizens coming together and raising their voices can really capture the attention of politicians and sort of force their hand into this, taking out a stance in opposition.
We've been speaking with Matt Heim. He's with the Assateague Coastal Trust, which has been fighting efforts to open up the coastline for offshore drilling. The administration, of course, has made a decision to do that, although an exemption has been made for the state of Florida. So we'll see how it all goes. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.